I was sitting at the dinner table, surrounded by his family, smiling politely as they spoke in their native language. I did not understand a single word, but I had grown used to that. It had become a strange sort of background music to me. Constant chatter, the occasional burst of laughter, all of it passing over my head like wind through trees. I had always trusted that their laughter was innocent, that the warmth in their voices included me, even if their words did not. But that evening something shifted. I had just finished telling a story from work, hoping to connect, hoping someone might ask a question or at least offer a smile. Instead, they looked at each other and said something quickly, too quickly. Then they laughed again. Not politely, not lightly, but with that kind of laughter that carries weight, the kind that you can feel even if you cannot understand. And this time they were all looking at me. Directly at me. I looked at my boyfriend, searching his face for reassurance, for translation, for kindness. But he only smiled and shook his head as if I was being silly. "They are just joking," he said softly, brushing it away like it was nothing. But the sting stayed. The confusion stayed. The feeling that I had just become the joke. I could not shake it. That was the first time I truly questioned what was happening behind the words I could not understand. And that moment was only the beginning. What came next would unravel everything I thought I knew about him, his family, and the love I believed was real. We met on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the most ordinary way possible, at the grocery store. I was reaching for a jar of pasta sauce when someone's hand brushed mine. I looked up, a little startled, and found myself face to face with the most disarming smile I had ever seen. He chuckled softly and pulled his hand back, gesturing for me to go first. There was something effortlessly charming about him. He had a presence that felt calm but confident, as though the world bent around him just slightly to make room. He made a joke about us fighting over the last jar, and I laughed, feeling oddly comfortable in his presence. That brief interaction turned into a spontaneous conversation that lingered in the canned goods aisle for almost 20 minutes. I learned that his name was Daniel, and he had recently moved to the city for work. His accent was subtle, enough to catch my attention, and he explained that he came from a small Eastern European country. I admitted I had never heard of it, and he grinned, saying most people had not. There was no arrogance in his tone, only warmth. When he asked if I would like to continue our conversation over coffee sometime, I said yes without hesitation. That first date turned into many. We would sit in small cafes, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, and our failures. Daniel listened in a way that made me feel like my words mattered. He had this ability to make the world fall away when he looked at me, and in those moments I felt seen. He was thoughtful in ways that were not always grand but always meaningful. He remembered small details like how I liked my tea with honey instead of sugar or how I always carried a book in my bag. He would surprise me with flowers on rainy days or send me photos of stray cats he found, knowing how much I loved them. It was easy to fall for him. He felt safe. He felt different. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship grew deeper. He introduced me to his world slowly, delicately. I met some of his friends first, kind, polite people who mostly spoke English around me, though occasionally slipping into their shared native tongue. Daniel always translated, always made sure I was included. It seemed like a beautiful culture, full of close-knit bonds and long-held traditions. I admired it and felt lucky to be welcomed into it, even if only on the surface at first. Eventually, he invited me to his family's home for dinner. I was nervous but excited. Meeting someone's family always carried weight, and I wanted to make a good impression. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing an outfit that was both modest and flattering, and I brought a small gift, a bottle of wine I had carefully picked out. His mother answered the door with a wide smile and kissed both my cheeks, speaking rapidly in her language before Daniel stepped in to translate. "She says you are very pretty and polite," he told me. I smiled, feeling my nerves ease just a bit. That evening went by quickly. His family spoke mostly in their language, but Daniel did his best to include me, whispering translations in my ear or summarizing what was being discussed. I laughed when they laughed, even when I did not quite understand the joke. I did not want to be rude or make anyone uncomfortable. It was their home, their space, and I was grateful to be invited into it. Over time, family dinners became more frequent. I began to recognize certain words or phrases, though I could not speak the language myself. I considered taking a class, and when I mentioned it to Daniel, he smiled but told me not to stress. "It is a difficult language," he said. "No need to worry. My family likes you just the way you are." Still, I made an effort. I learned how to say hello, thank you, and goodbye in their language. I tried cooking traditional dishes from his culture, and even surprised Daniel with one on our 6-month anniversary. He was touched, saying it reminded him of home. He would tell me stories about his childhood, running through forests, celebrating holidays with dancing and music, the way his grandmother used to braid his hair when he was small. I loved those stories. They made me feel closer to him, like I was stepping into a part of his life that few others had seen. We rarely argued. If we did, it was about small things like whose turn it was to do the dishes or what movie to watch on a Friday night. Daniel had a calm demeanor, and I appreciated that. He never raised his voice, never made me feel dismissed or small. When I had a rough day, he would hold me in silence, letting me cry without judgment. When I celebrated a work promotion, he showed up with my favorite pastries and a bouquet of wildflowers, saying he always knew I would succeed. To the outside world, and to me, our relationship looked and felt almost perfect. There was a quiet stability to it that I had never experienced before. I felt like I could breathe with him, like I could be my full self without fear of rejection. His family became more familiar, though I still struggled with the language barrier. I often felt like an observer rather than a participant, but I told myself it was natural. I was the outsider, and they had their own ways of communicating their own shared history. Daniel always reassured me that they liked me, that they were just not very confident in their English. I accepted that explanation. I trusted him. Looking back, I remember how eager I was to be accepted, how much effort I put into being respectful and understanding. I wanted to be a part of his world. I believed that love was about bridging gaps and building something together. And I truly believed that we were doing that. What I did not realize then was that love, real love, also required truth. It required inclusion, not just in actions but in intention. I thought I was being embraced by his family, welcomed into their circle. But slowly, quietly, something else was unfolding behind words I could not understand and smiles that did not always reach the eyes. And while I was falling deeper into a love I thought was mutual, a very different story was being written on the other side of the language I could not speak. The first time I met Daniel's family, I remember being overwhelmed by a mixture of excitement and nerves. I had spent the whole day preparing, trying on 3 different outfits, checking my makeup twice, and rehearsing polite greetings in the mirror. It felt important, like a quiet test that no one had officially announced. I wanted them to like me. I wanted to be accepted. When we arrived at their home, I was immediately struck by how warm and inviting the space felt. There were photos on the walls, sepia-toned memories of weddings, holidays, and smiling faces frozen in time. The house smelled of spices I could not name, rich and savory, something slow cooked with care. His mother greeted me first, wrapping me in a hug and kissing both cheeks, speaking quickly in her native language. I smiled, trying to mimic her warmth, glancing at Daniel for guidance. He simply said, "She likes you already," with a grin, and I nodded, relieved. His father was quieter but polite, shaking my hand and offering a small nod. His sister came in from the kitchen a few minutes later, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes taking me in from head to toe with a measured expression. She greeted me in English, her accent soft but present, and I felt a small wave of comfort at hearing words I understood. Dinner was a blur of flavors and fast conversations. I listened closely, trying to follow the rhythm of their language, even though I could not grasp the meaning. They laughed often, especially between the sister and their mother, sometimes glancing at me in a way that made me feel slightly out of place. But I told myself I was being paranoid. It was natural, I thought. They were close and I was new. It would take time. Daniel sat beside me, translating bits and pieces now and then. He would lean in and whisper, "They are talking about the food," or "My dad is telling a story from when I was a kid." I nodded, laughed politely when they laughed, even if I did not understand. I was determined to be gracious, to make a good impression. Still, there were moments, tiny ones, that left me uncertain. Like when his mother brought out dessert and said something quickly in her language. The room erupted in laughter, and Daniel smiled sheepishly before saying, "She is just teasing me about my sweet tooth." I laughed along, but something about the way they had looked at me before laughing stayed with me. Just a flicker of something I could not quite name. After dinner, we sat in the living room with tea and fruit. His family continued speaking in their language, occasionally switching to English when asking me a question or offering me something. I appreciated the effort, but the switch always felt momentary, like a spotlight before the scene moved on without me. At one point, his sister asked how Daniel and I met, and I began telling the story, only to be cut off halfway through when she turned and said something in their language that made everyone else chuckle. Daniel patted my hand and said, "She is just saying I should have asked you out sooner." I smiled, even as my cheeks burned. Later, in the car on the way home, I mentioned the moments that had felt a little strange. I asked if they were laughing at me or if I had said something wrong. Daniel shook his head and chuckled softly. "They are just shy. They do not speak English very often, so they get nervous and fall back into their own language. It is not about you." I wanted to believe him. He sounded sincere, and I reminded myself that cultural differences could feel awkward at first. I did not want to come across as sensitive or judgmental, so I let it go. The next few visits followed a similar pattern. Warm welcomes, good food, lots of laughter in a language I could not follow. I would smile and nod, offering polite responses, and Daniel would occasionally fill me in. But his translations became shorter over time. "Just family stuff," he would say. Or, "Nothing important." I trusted him. I reminded myself that I was still new to their world. I began to notice small things, moments that felt more pointed, though subtle enough to second guess. One afternoon, while helping in the kitchen, I handed his mother a bowl, and she said something sharply to Daniel. He responded quickly in their language, and she turned to me with a tight smile. Later, when I asked him about it, he said, "She just did not want you to worry about helping. She thinks guests should relax." But the look on her face had not matched that sentiment. At another dinner, his sister made a comment after I mispronounced a dish's name. Everyone laughed, and Daniel hesitated before saying, "She is just teasing you. Do not take it personally." I laughed it off, but something inside me tightened. The kind of tightness that comes from not knowing exactly what is happening around you, but feeling deep down that you are the subject, not the guest. Still, I kept trying. I began researching their culture more, learning about their holidays, food, and customs. I asked Daniel to teach me a few more phrases, but he always brushed it off. "It is too hard," he said. "You will just frustrate yourself. My family does not expect you to learn it." Found that strange. Most people I knew were proud when someone showed interest in their culture. But again, I trusted him. Thought he knew best. I brought thoughtful gifts when we visited. Homemade desserts, wine, or little trinkets from local shops. His mother always accepted them with a smile, but there was never much warmth behind her eyes. His sister remained polite but distant. His father was quiet as ever. I told myself it was just their way. Maybe they were not used to someone like me. Someone outside their traditions, their language, their expectations. There were nights I would come home and lie awake, thinking about how different I felt around them. With Daniel I felt safe, loved, and understood. With his family, I felt like I was watching a play without subtitles. Always present but never really part of the story. I tried to talk to Daniel about it again after a particularly uncomfortable dinner, where I had spent nearly the entire evening smiling silently while his family conversed in rapid, animated exchanges. I asked him if they liked me, if I was doing something wrong. He frowned and pulled me into a hug. "They like you," he said. "They are just old-fashioned. Takes them a while to warm up to someone new. Please do not stress about it. You are doing great." I believed him because I wanted to. I loved him. I believed that love could overcome awkwardness, that effort would be noticed, and that kindness would eventually be returned. But the small moments continued. Laughter that stopped when I entered a room. Quick glances exchanged between his sister and mother. Phrases spoken just after I had said something. And always the same dismissive answers from Daniel. "You are imagining it. They are not like that. It is just a language thing." I began to feel like I was living between two versions of reality. One where I was loved and accepted, and another where I was quietly tolerated, perhaps even mocked. But without knowing the language, I had no way of confirming which version was true. I was dependent on Daniel for translation, for truth. And I trusted that he would never lie to me. So I continued. I smiled through the discomfort. I stayed quiet when I felt left out. I tried harder, brought more thoughtful gifts, laughed at more jokes I did not understand. I reminded myself that relationships were not just about two people but about the world they brought with them. I wanted to be a part of his world, even if it meant losing a little of myself in the process. What I did not realize then was that the pieces I was letting go of, the self-doubt I swallowed, the voice I silenced, the intuition I ignored, were slowly creating a space where hurt could grow in silence. And in that silence, the truth was beginning to take root. I just had not heard it yet. The family gatherings became more frequent over time. At first, they were monthly occasions, but eventually they turned into weekly dinners, birthday celebrations, or impromptu get-togethers that Daniel insisted we attend. I never said no. I thought that showing up, being present, and continuing to engage would help bridge whatever invisible gap lingered between me and his family. I still believed that effort would earn trust, that kindness would eventually be returned. But the more time I spent with them, the more I began to feel it. Something unspoken but undeniably there. First, the moments were small. I would say something, an anecdote from my day, a comment about the food, and there would be a pause. Someone, usually his sister, would glance at his mother, then speak quickly in their language. It would be followed by laughter, not loud but distinct, sharp. Then silence would fall again, and they would return to their meals as if nothing had happened. I would sit there, smiling awkwardly, looking at Daniel for some kind of explanation. Sometimes he would offer a vague, "They are just laughing about something from earlier," or, "Do not worry, it was not about you." But the timing never felt like coincidence. The more it happened, the more I began to shrink into myself. I stopped offering stories. I stopped commenting on things. I would sit quietly, fork in hand, nodding when appropriate, smiling when expected. I felt like a ghost at the table, visible but not present, tolerated but not welcomed. I began to dread the gatherings, but I never told Daniel that. I thought if I showed him I was uncomfortable, it might seem like I was not trying hard enough. And I was trying. I was trying so much that it began to wear on me. There was one night in particular I will never forget. It was a celebration for his father's birthday. The house was fuller than usual. Cousins, aunts, uncles, neighbors. Everyone was speaking in their language, laughing freely, moving from room to room with drinks in hand and plates of food balanced precariously. I stayed near Daniel, unsure of where to insert myself. Occasionally someone would speak to me in English, but it never lasted long. Conversations would quickly revert back, as though the effort to include me was a brief courtesy before they could return to something more comfortable. At one point I helped his mother clear the table. She handed me a dish and said something sharp in her language. Daniel, who had just walked into the kitchen, froze for a second before replying in the same language. They exchanged a few words, their tones low but pointed. Then his mother turned back to me with a tight smile. "Thank you," she said in English before walking away. I looked at Daniel and asked what she had said. He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "She just said you are not used to our food, so you should not strain yourself." I nodded, though I knew he was not telling me the full truth. Her tone had not sounded concerned. It had sounded judgmental. Later that evening, I overheard laughter coming from the hallway. I stepped out of the bathroom and saw a small group of his cousins standing in a circle, whispering and giggling. One of them noticed me and said something quickly, after which the others turned, glanced at me, and erupted into louder laughter. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. When they saw that I was still watching, they walked away without a word. I went to Daniel, pulling him aside. "What were they saying?" he asked. "I know it was about me." He frowned. "Why do you always assume everything is about you?" he said. "They were probably just sharing a joke. Not everything has to be so dramatic." I felt my stomach drop. I heard them laugh right after looking at me. "You cannot tell me that was just a coincidence. You are being paranoid," he said, brushing past me. "You are reading too much into it. This is what happens when you do not understand the language. You start inventing things." His words stung more than the laughter. Felt small, ridiculous, as though my instincts, my observations, were meaningless. I wanted to cry, but I swallowed the feeling and followed him back into the party, forcing a smile that did not reach my eyes. In the days that followed, I began to withdraw. I questioned myself constantly. Was I imagining things? Was I being too sensitive? I replayed every interaction in my mind, looking for signs, for validation that I was not losing touch with reality. I began to dread the weekends. I began to dread dinners. I even began to dread Daniel's reassurances, because they no longer felt like comfort. They felt like a dismissal, but I still tried. I baked cookies for his mother, a recipe from her region I had spent hours researching and practicing. I brought them to the next dinner, hopeful, expectant. She accepted them, nodded, and placed them on the side table without comment. No one ate them. I spent evenings on language apps, trying to teach myself enough to follow basic conversation. But the language was complex, and without guidance I struggled. When I asked Daniel if he could help, he sighed. Why are you doing this? You are stressing yourself out for no reason. They like you. You do not need to learn the language to prove anything. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him why he could not see what I saw, why he refused to believe me. But instead I nodded and let it go. Again. The worst moments were the silences. The moments after I left the room and laughter erupted behind me. The moments when I returned to hear a sentence stop mid-air, and everyone would glance at me before moving on. I began to feel like I was losing touch with myself. I used to be confident, sure of my instincts. Now I questioned every thought, every emotion. I had placed so much trust in Daniel, believed that his love for me was solid enough to keep me grounded. But his love had started to feel like a rope slipping through my hands. One evening, after another dinner filled with hushed voices and suspicious glances, I sat in the car in silence. Daniel was humming along to a song on the radio, seemingly unaffected. I turned the volume down and spoke quietly. I feel like they hate me. He looked at me, annoyed. That is ridiculous. I feel like I am being mocked, I continued. I know I cannot understand the language, but I know how it feels to be laughed at. He scoffed. This again. Why are you always making everything about yourself? You think my entire family has nothing better to do than sit around and talk about you? I stared at him, hurt flooding my chest. I am not saying I am the center of the universe. I am saying I feel excluded. I feel like they do not want me there. He shook his head. They are just not like your family. They do not shower people with compliments and hugs. That does not mean they are against you. You have this narrative in your head, and you are clinging to it. I looked away, tears welling up in my eyes. You are supposed to be on my side. I am, he said sharply. But I am also not going to validate some insecurity you are creating out of thin air. We drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling. I felt a kind of loneliness I had never known before, not just from his family, but from him. The one person who was supposed to see me, believe me, protect me, was now the person making me doubt my own reality. The mockery had begun long ago, in ways so subtle I had not recognized it. Now it was louder, more obvious, and yet still shrouded in a language I could not pierce. And the man I loved, the man I thought would always be my ally, had become the person convincing me that my pain was an illusion. Started with a language app. At first I told myself it was just for fun, something to keep my mind busy, to feel a little more included. But deep down I knew I was not learning it for fun. I was desperate. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening around me, what was being said right in front of me but kept behind a curtain of unfamiliar words and laughter I could never decipher. Every evening after work, I would sit quietly in our bedroom, repeating phrases into the microphone, listening to pronunciation guides, memorizing vocabulary. I made flashcards. I watched videos online. I even downloaded a children's show in their language, thinking that if I could not follow adult conversations, maybe I could begin at the level of a child. It was exhausting and slow, but I kept going. Every new word felt like a small piece of a larger puzzle I had been trying to solve for months. One night, about 2 months into my secret efforts, we were at another family dinner. This time, it was his sister's engagement celebration. There were more people than usual, and everyone was in high spirits. I sat in the corner of the living room, balancing a plate on my lap, trying to look as though I belonged, though the growing ache in my chest told me otherwise. His cousins were standing nearby, talking quickly, laughing between sentences. I caught a few words I recognized, words that, even in my limited understanding, felt like they were about me. Heard my name. Then the word for clumsy. Then laughter. Then someone mimicked the way I had almost dropped a glass earlier in the evening. My cheeks burned. I tried to keep my face still, to act like I had not heard. But inside I was trembling. They were talking about me. I had not imagined it. I had not exaggerated anything. They were laughing at me, just as I had feared all along. And they felt so safe doing it, so comfortable because they knew I could not understand them. Or at least they thought I could not. I said nothing that night. I smiled when expected, posed for pictures, hugged his sister. But when we got home, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my eyes ached. Something had shifted. I could not unhear what I had heard. I could not go back to pretending. The next day, I began using a translation app more actively. I would record snippets of conversations when I could, then play them back later to try and catch words I might have missed. I even began scanning their social media posts. I created a separate account so I could view public comments without drawing attention. It was there, hidden in comment threads and photo captions, that I began to piece together the truth. Under a photo of me and Daniel at a family barbecue, someone had commented in their language. I copied it into the app, heart pounding. The translation hit me like a wave. She looks like a lost sheep. Another comment. He could have done better. A third. Poor guy, trapped with her. I kept scrolling, my stomach sinking deeper with every word. Photo after photo, post after post. Mockery, sarcasm, dismissive remarks. About my appearance, about how I dressed, how I spoke, how I smiled too much, how I always asked questions. I had been reduced to a joke, an outsider they barely tolerated and regularly ridiculed. But the final blow came from Daniel himself. One afternoon, while he was out getting groceries, his laptop pinged with a message. He had forgotten to close his messaging app. I should have looked away. I should have respected his privacy. But something in me broke and I clicked. The conversation was with his cousin. They were talking about the engagement party. I scrolled up. First, it was the usual chatter. Then his cousin wrote, "She was really trying hard, huh?" Followed by a laughing emoji. Daniel replied, "She always does. It is kind of sad, honestly." His cousin said, "You should teach her our language already, make her less clueless." Daniel replied, "Then we would not have anyone to laugh at." I stared at the screen, frozen. My ears were ringing. My face felt hot. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. He had laughed at me. With him. He had allowed it. Encouraged it. I thought back to every time I had come to him, vulnerable, asking if I was imagining things. And every single time he had made me feel like I was crazy. He had made me doubt myself, gaslight me until I apologized for feeling hurt. All while he laughed with them behind my back. The betrayal was a scream inside me. It tore through everything I had built with him. The trust, the effort, the hope. I saw it all crumbling piece by piece. I sat there, reading the conversation again and again, as though some new interpretation might make it hurt less. But there was no other way to see it. He did not respect me. He did not protect me. He never had. When he came home I was still sitting there. I did not even try to hide the screen. He walked in, saw my face and froze. "What happened?" he asked. I looked up at him, my voice flat. "I read your messages." He blinked. "What messages?" "Your cousin," I said. "The ones where you called me clueless. Where you laughed about me being the joke." He went pale. "You went through my messages." I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "Do not make this about that. Do not deflect. I needed to see the truth because you would never tell it to me. And now I have." He stammered. "It was just a joke." "Was it a joke when I came to you crying and you told me I was paranoid? Was it a joke when you told me they liked me and I was just being dramatic? Was all of that a joke too?" His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time I did not blink them away. "I tried so hard. I learned your language. I memorized their customs. I spent hours trying to be someone they could accept. And all along you knew. You knew what they were saying. And you laughed with them." He tried to reach for me but I stepped back. I could not bear his touch. Not anymore. Packed a bag that night. I did not know where I would go, only that I could not stay. The pain was too deep, the betrayal too sharp. I left behind the dinners, the language apps, the desperate need to be liked. I left behind the man I had once loved, now unrecognizable to me. As I closed the door behind me, I realized I was finally stepping out of the silence. For months, I had lived in a place where words were used as weapons I could not see. Now I had seen them clearly, and there was no going back. When I left that night, I went to a friend's apartment. She welcomed me without asking questions, sensing immediately that I needed space before I could speak. I collapsed on her couch, numb and quiet, replaying everything in my mind. My world had shattered, but the pieces were still falling, still slicing through the last bits of denial I had held onto. Barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I saw his face, heard the cruel laughter in my mind, and felt the burn of humiliation rising again. The next morning I woke up with my body aching and my heart heavy, but I knew I needed closure. I needed to say everything that had been building inside me. I had let myself be silenced for too long, and I was done being the quiet one, the agreeable one, the outsider who waited for acceptance. I needed to face him, and if possible I needed to face them. I texted Daniel and told him to meet me at the small cafe near our old apartment. It was a place we had gone to often in the early days, back when everything still felt light and full of promise. Now it felt like neutral ground, public enough that things could not spiral out of control, but familiar enough that he would come. When he arrived, he looked exhausted. His face was pale, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He sat down across from me without speaking, his hands nervously fidgeting with the sleeve of his coat. I let the silence linger for a moment before I finally spoke. "I did not come here for apologies," I said evenly. "I came here because I need to say what I never had the courage to say before." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "No, you will listen first." He nodded slowly, his lips pressed together. "I gave everything I had to this relationship," I said. "I trusted you. I believed you when you told me that your family liked me, that I was imagining things. I let myself feel crazy, small, and foolish because you made me believe that my instincts were wrong. And all along I was right." He looked down at the table, his shoulders hunched. "I heard them," I continued. "I understood what they said at the engagement party. I saw the comments on social media. I read your messages with your cousin. You mock me. You let them mock me. You encouraged it. I did not mean to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking. It started off as nothing. They were being stupid and I should have stopped it. I know that. But it got out of hand, and I did not know how to fix it. You laughed with them," I said, my voice sharp. "You laughed at me." "I was scared," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "They have always been intense, especially with outsiders. I thought if I just let it go, if I did not challenge them, things would calm down. I did not want to start a war between you and my family." "And what about me?" "Yes. What about protecting me? What about standing up for the woman you claimed to love? You let them tear me down to keep things peaceful for yourself." His eyes filled with tears. "I did love you. I still do." I shook my head slowly. "Love does not look like that. Love does not humiliate. Love does not silence. Love does not stand by while you are made a fool." He reached across the table, trying to touch my hand. Pulled away. "I want to believe that you did not intend for it to become what it did," I said. "But intention does not erase harm. It does not undo the nights I cried myself to sleep, thinking I was just not good enough. It does not change the fact that I begged you for honesty, and you fed me lies." "I did not know how to stop it," he said again, weaker this time. "You could have told them to stop," I replied. "You could have stood beside me instead of behind them." He fell silent, and for the first time, I saw the weight of his choices settle fully on his shoulders. I stood up, my chest tight but my spine straight. I am done being your secret shame, I said. I am done making excuses for your cowardice. I am walking away, not because I do not love you anymore, but because I love myself enough to stop letting you break me. He looked like he wanted to speak again, to plead, to say something that might make it all go away. But I was already turning, already walking away. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face like a rush of clarity. I was shaking, but I felt lighter. The confrontation had not changed the past, but it had given me my voice back. For the first time in a long while, I was standing in my truth, no longer hidden behind politeness or silence. A few days later, I received a message from his sister. She said she wanted to talk. Part of me wanted to delete it without responding, but something inside urged me to listen. I met her at a small park near her home. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her scarf as she sat down beside me on the bench. I heard what happened, she said. Daniel told us. I wanted to say I am sorry. I did not reply immediately. Waited. I know we were not kind, she continued. I know we laughed, said things we should not have. We never thought you would understand. And that was wrong. It was cruel. I finally turned to look at her. You never asked yourselves how it would feel if the roles were reversed. She looked ashamed. No, we were wrong. I tried so hard, I said quietly. I wanted to be part of the family. I wanted to learn. But every time I came close, you pushed me away and laughed behind my back. I know, she said. I cannot undo that. But I wanted you to know I regret it. He nodded. Thank you for saying that. But I am not sure it makes a difference anymore. She looked down, accepting it. When I walked away from that conversation, I felt another layer of pain lift. I had stood in front of them, in front of the people who hurt me, and I had not crumbled. I had faced the truth and spoken mine. The relationship was over. The pieces of what we had built lay scattered and broken, but I was not shattered with them. I had survived the silence, the humiliation, the betrayal. And now I was moving forward. Not quietly, not with shame, but with strength and with my voice fully intact. In the weeks that followed, I existed in a strange space between emptiness and freedom. The silence in my life was no longer the stifling kind I had known during my relationship. It was a peaceful quiet, the kind that gives room to breathe. I spent a lot of time alone, sitting by the window of the small apartment I had rented, listening to the rustle of the trees and the distant hum of life around me. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I did not feel the need to prove myself to anyone. I did not have to worry about whether I was being laughed at or whispered about in a language I could not understand. I was simply myself, wounded, yes, but still standing. The first real step in my healing was admitting that I needed help. I started seeing a therapist, someone who listened without judgment and slowly helped me untangle the emotional mess I had been carrying. Week after week, I talked about the manipulation, the gaslighting, the moments I had brushed off when deep down I had known they were wrong. It was not easy. Sometimes I cried through an entire session. Sometimes I left feeling more broken than before. But little by little, I began to understand that healing is not about pretending it did not happen. It is about facing it, feeling it, and choosing to move forward anyway. I also began reconnecting with friends I had unintentionally distanced myself from during my relationship. I had not realized just how isolated I had become, how I had adjusted my life to fit around his schedule, his family, his comfort. Now I was meeting friends for coffee, sharing stories, laughing again. I was rebuilding my sense of community, one small moment at a time. And in those moments, I started to remember who I had been before everything unraveled. Kind, curious, open-hearted, and strong. One of the most unexpected parts of my recovery was the way I grew to appreciate my own culture and heritage again. During my time with Daniel, I had tried so hard to immerse myself in his world that I had let go of pieces of mine. I had stopped celebrating certain traditions, stopped cooking the dishes my mother had taught me, stopped using my native language unless I was speaking to family. But now I found myself returning to those roots, not as a form of defiance, but as a quiet reclaiming of my identity. I hosted small dinners with food from my childhood. I lit candles on the holidays I had once overlooked. I even joined an online group where people from my background shared stories and memories. Felt like coming home to myself. Learning his language had started as an act of desperation, but it became something more. Even after the relationship ended, I continued studying, not because I wanted to understand him or his family anymore, but because I had come to enjoy the challenge. I had worked hard for that knowledge, and I refused to let it be tainted by the people who had used it to hurt me. Language, after all, is a tool. It can be used to isolate but also to connect, to empower, to reclaim. A few months after the breakup, I attended a multicultural storytelling event at a local community center. I submitted my name for an open mic slot, unsure whether I would follow through. But as I sat there listening to others share their stories of love, loss, migration, and resilience, something within me stirred. When my name was called, I walked to the front of the room with trembling hands but a steady heart. I told my story. Not just the betrayal, but the love I had given, the silence I had endured, the moment I found my voice. I spoke in English, but near the end, I switched briefly into his language. A short, clear sentence that I had rehearsed many times. I understand now, I said in their language. And I forgive myself. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with soft applause. I stepped down from the stage with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from release. I had shared my truth in my words and theirs. I had taken back the very thing they had used to diminish me, and turned it into something healing. With time, I began to see the red flags I had once ignored so clearly. The way Daniel had always brushed off my discomfort. The way his family's jokes had felt too pointed, too frequent. The way I had constantly had to adjust, to shrink myself to avoid tension. I saw how I had mistaken survival for compromise. How I had convinced myself that love required sacrifice even when it came at the cost of my own peace. But I no longer blamed myself. I did not dwell in shame. Instead, I used those realizations to set new boundaries, both with others and with myself. I promised never to betray my intuition again. I promised to ask questions, to speak up, to honor my discomfort instead of burying it. I promised to love with openness, but never at the expense of my own dignity. I also stopped seeking closure from Daniel or his family. I understood now that closure is not always something someone else can give you. Sometimes it is the quiet decision you make to let go, to walk away without needing them to understand or apologize. Sometimes closure is simply choosing to live well, to love yourself enough to keep moving. Months turned into a year. Life went on. I found new routines, new places, even new faces that made me feel safe. I traveled on my own for the first time in a long while, taking a solo trip to a city I had always wanted to visit. I walked through museums, tried unfamiliar foods, wrote in my journal at little cafes, and spoke to strangers in both my language and the one I had once learned out of heartbreak. And I smiled. Not the forced, polite smile I had worn so often, but a true one, born of strength and freedom. There were still days when the memories stung. Healing is not linear. Sometimes I would hear a phrase in his language and feel the old ache return. But it no longer consumed me. I no longer lived in fear of being misunderstood or ridiculed. I had faced the worst of it and survived. And not only survived, I had flourished. In the end, what stayed with me most was not the pain, but the growth. The way I had turned something ugly into something powerful. The way I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, not as who I was before, but as someone wiser, more grounded, more fiercely protective of her heart. If there is anything I want others to take from my story, it is this. Do not let anyone convince you that your voice does not matter. Do not let silence become a prison. And most of all, do not mistake love for tolerance of pain. Real love uplifts, it respects, sees you. I once thought I needed to belong in someone else's world. But now I know I am enough in my own. And that, more than anything, is the most powerful truth I have ever learned.